Hi everyone and welcome to the tutorial. Today I'm going to be demonstrating how to knit an easy blanket pattern. The blanket uses a chevron stitch for a bold and geometric look and becomes a wonderful gift when passed on to a recipient. Use as few or as many colours as you like for your version and enjoy how quick this project is to whip up with big needles and yarn. For your project you will need Aran weight yarn. I used approximately 915 metres or 1,000 yards for my version, 6mm, also known as US size 10 needles, or the correct needle size to give you gauge, a ruler for measuring gauge, scissors, a tapestry needle, and stitch markers are optional. You can find the free written instructions for this pattern on my website, and I'll leave a link to them in the description box below so you can follow along with me. Let's get started. I'm making a small sample swatch today to show you how this blanket is worked, and I recommend you also make a sample swatch like this before casting on your final project to ensure that your gauge is the same as mine. We're going to use the long tail cast on method, and as you need a large number of stitches to knit the final blanket, I recommend using the 2-ball version of the long tail cast on. This is where you'll take 2 separate strands of the yarn you want to start your blanket with, which could just be the 2 ends of the ball, and hold them together to make a starting slip knot. Then place one yarn over your left thumb and the other yarn over your left index finger and proceed to cast on using the long tail cast on method like normal. Once you've made a few stitches, go back and undo your initial slip knot so that each stitch is only made up of one strand of yarn. I'll leave a link to an in-depth tutorial on this technique in the description box below if you'd like a bit more guidance on how it works. As I mentioned, your actual blanket will require a large number of stitches, and the exact number I used was 135 stitches. So you can cast on the full 135 stitches here if you like, but for my little sample swatch, I'm just going to cast on 39 stitches. Once that number is reached, I'll cut one of the yarns, leaving one remaining, and I'm ready to start knitting. The pattern we're using for this blanket is a 1-row chevron pattern, which handily means there's only 1 row's worth of instructions that you need to memorize. We're going to be working plain knit stitches with a simple knit 2 together at the trough of each chevron and a knit front back at the peak of each chevron, and the stacking of those increases and decreases is what causes the knitted fabric to zigzag like this. So whether you're knitting a full-size blanket or just a swatch right now, the 1-row instructions are exactly the same, and that is to knit 11, then work a repeat of knit 2 together, knit 6, knit front back, knit 7, all the way to your last 12 stitches, then knit 2 together, knit 6, knit front back, and knit 3. Let's walk through that together. We start the row with a knit 11, knit 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Then we've got our repeat. These are the instructions within the asterisks, which firstly ask for a knit 2 together. So insert your right hand needle behind the front legs of both the next 2 stitches, starting with the stitch furthest from the left hand needle tip. Wrap your yarn around the right hand needle tip and draw the yarn through the stitches then drop both stitches from the left hand needle. We'll knit 6, knit 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and now we're going to increase with a knit front back. For this, we'll insert our right hand needle into the front leg of the next stitch, wrap the yarn around the needle and draw the yarn through, but leave the stitch on the left hand needle. Now swing the right hand needle tip around so you can also insert it through the back leg of the same stitch. Again, wrap the yarn around your right hand needle, draw the yarn through, and then you can drop the worked stitch from the left hand needle. Finally, we need to knit 7. Knit 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. If you have a larger stitch count, you'll need to keep repeating the knit 2 together, knit 6, knit front back, knit 7 until you reach your last 12 stitches. But I've already reached those stitches here. So I'm now following the final instructions of the row, which are to knit 2 together, knit 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, knit front back, and knit 3. 1, 2, 3. That's basically all there is to this stitch pattern. So you can see that apart from some counting, it's really very simple to work. Let's knit another row together. We start with a knit 11, knit 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Then we have our repeat instructions that are worked continuously to the last stitches of the row, and these are to knit 2 together, so insert your needle into both of the next 2 stitches, wrap your yarn around the needle, draw the yarn through both stitches, and drop those 2 stitches from the needle. There I've completed working the 2 stitches together to decrease 1 stitch. Then knit 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now we've got the knit front back increase, so insert your needle into the front leg of the next stitch and complete a knit stitch up until where you would drop the stitch from the needle, and instead keep the stitch on the needle. Swing your needle tip around to insert it into the back leg of the same stitch. Wrap the yarn around the needle, draw the yarn through, and then you can drop the stitch from the left hand needle. We've essentially worked this stitch twice, which created a new stitch, and that also compensated for the stitch we decreased back here, allowing us to maintain the same overall stitch count throughout our blanket, whilst also creating the chevron patterning. and the repeat ends with a knit 7, knit 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. If you have more stitches in your row, you will return to the start of the asterisks and keep working through those enclosed instructions until you get to your last 12 stitches. I'm already there, so I'll now knit 2 together, knit 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, knit front back, and knit 3. If you want to use markers to help you count, and you place them between each repeat as you work across a row, please note that in the following row, you'll find that your markers now fall between the 2 stitches of the knit 2 together that's at the start of each repeat. This means you'll need to slip the first stitch of the decrease out of the way to grab your marker, place your marker in front of the stitch, and then work the knit 2 together to start the repeat. You'll find this keeps happening because of the way the increases and decreases move the distribution of your stitches around in each row. If you prefer, you can use removable markers like these safety pin style ones, so you can open them, remove them from the needle, and then place them at the start of the repeat again. But I didn't mind using fixed ring markers throughout my blanket project and just using the stitch slip method. To change colours in your project, we're going to wait until we reach the end of a row, then cut the colour we were working with, leaving about an 8-inch or 20cm long tail to weave in later. Then we pick up our next colour and leave the same length tail of it hanging off the side of our work. We then just start knitting with the new colour as normal, pulling on the tail as necessary to clean up the first few stitches. Essentially, this blanket is reversible and doesn't really have a right or a wrong side. However, when you change colours in garter stitch, you get a clean break between the old and new colour on one side, the side that was facing you as you changed to the new colour, and you'll get a faded look between the old and new colour on the other side. Therefore, you might want to make sure you're always changing colour when the same side is facing you, and mark this side with a progress keeper to remind you which side it is. For my final blanket, which used 4 colours, I cast on the full 135 stitches and worked 21 rows of the chevron patterning in my first colour. The odd number of rows in this stripe meant the smooth side of the long tail cast on was facing me when I was ready to change colours. Then I changed to my next colour and worked 20 more rows of the pattern. I changed to my third colour and worked another 20 rows of the pattern. Then changed to my fourth colour and worked another 20 rows of the pattern. I continued changing through my colours and working 20 rows in each until I had 12 stripes in total, then I bound off. You can play around with the width of your stripes however you like. To bind off, I use a traditional chain bind off, which means knitting 2 stitches and then passing the further stitch from the tip of the right hand needle up and over the closest stitch to the tip and dropping the stitch off the needle. Then knit another stitch and pass the further stitch from the tip of the right hand needle up and over the closest stitch. Knit another stitch then pass the further stitch up, over and off the needle. And just keep repeating that until all you have left is one stitch on the right hand needle. We'll then pull the final stitch nice and big and cut the yarn so that we leave a tail remaining. There are many different methods you could use to weave in the tails on your project, but I just use a simple duplicate stitch method for this. So I thread my tapestry needle with one of the tails and then follow the path of a strand of yarn in the knitted fabric, weaving the needle around the stitches of the knitted fabric as I see them. If you knit a swatch, I recommend giving the finished fabric a quick wash or soak, then gently squeezing the water out of it and leaving it to dry flat. This will give you an idea of how your yarn will behave when it's washed, as some yarns will puff or stretch out during the process. When the fabric is dry, we're then going to measure how wide each of our chevrons are, and also how many rows we have across 4 inches or 10 centimeters of the fabric. We're looking for chevrons that are about 3 1/3 inches or 8.5 centimeters in width from peak to peak, and to have 24 rows across a 4-inch or 10 centimeter distance. If your chevrons are narrower than that and you have more rows, it means you're knitting at a tighter gauge and your blanket is going to turn out smaller than mine. And if you have bigger chevrons and less rows, it means you're knitting at a looser gauge and your blanket will be larger than mine. These differences will affect how much yarn you need to complete your project as well. Please keep the possibility of differences in mind if you're choosing not to swatch and have decided to cast on your full-size blanket from the get-go. To compensate for any differences in gauge when you're ready to cast on your actual blanket, you can either adjust your needle size until you get the same recommended measurements and then follow the instructions exactly as written, or you can cast on less or more stitches for your blanket and then work less or more rows to get a finished project that's about the same size. Please note that this second option may still affect your yardage requirements because you're working with a different density of stitches. To adjust the size of your blanket through the stitch count, you'll need to start with the initial recommended cast on number of 135 stitches. You can then add 16 stitches or subtract 16 stitches from this number for each chevron repeat you want to add or subtract. For instance, if I wanted to add the width of one more chevron, I'd need to cast on 135 plus 16 stitches, which is 151 stitches. If I wanted to add the width of 2 more chevrons, I'd need to cast on 135 plus 16 plus 16 stitches, which is 167 stitches. If I wanted to decrease the width of one chevron, I'd need to cast on 135 minus 16 stitches, which is 119 stitches. No matter what multiple you end up with, you'll then work the pattern exactly as I've demonstrated, just over your particular number of stitches, and with whatever total number of rows you desire. Thank you so much for joining me for this tutorial. I hope you enjoyed it. If you make a blanket of your own, please feel free to tag your project with #TheSweaterCollective to share it with us on social media, and let me know if you have any questions in the comments section below. Don't forget to also give this video a like and subscribe to the channel to keep up to date with more tutorials just like this one coming your way soon. I'll see you next time.